I'm sorry, Raywat. Raywat Deonandan is an
Excellent.
epidemiologist at the University of Ottawa. You know, it's hilarious because the more you practice something, the more you get in your head. And I know we've spoken before, but it's been a while, so I'm like, I don't want to fudge up his last
Hey,
name.
I've
And go
spelled my own
figure.
name wrong at times, so it's okay.
Oh, man. Egg on my face. Raywat, thanks for being here. So, safe to say you're one of those experts?
Yeah, now let's contextualize this. Only a small number of police officers still remain unvaccinated, so we're talking about a very small number of people. It's just that, how much can you tolerate here? I'm in favor of vaccine mandates for certain professions, not everybody. Those professions include healthcare workers, hospital workers, and people who have to come into contact with large numbers of the general public every day. That includes emergency responders like police officers. So I think it's inappropriate to not require that vaccination policy. What I hope, though, is that for those individuals who aren't vaccinated, so long as the pandemic is still raging, as it is, at least wear a mask, at least require testing. The devil's going to be in the details.
Okay, so we don't know if they're going to still require their officers to wear masks if they're unvaccinated. Is that correct?
That I have no information on that front, so I would assume
Okay.
they're not enforcing that rule.
And so you're worried about people, the vulnerable people that the force may come in contact with, the people that they're meant to serve and protect.
I worry about two things. First is that if you develop symptoms of this disease, you're probably going to have to take time off work. And so that's a service denied the population because you refuse to get vaccinated. Second is, as you said, some people are going to be vulnerable to being exposed to this disease. If you're like me and have a small child, for example, who can't get vaccinated, you're managing your exposures very carefully. And now that's thrown out the window because someone else chose not to be vaccinated. A lot of this comes from this misunderstanding of the power of vaccination in the Omicron context. Some people believe it no longer offers any advantages, which is completely untrue. Completely untrue. Even with Omicron, which has some escape properties, vaccination is really good at preventing symptoms and hospitalization, and still okay at preventing infection and possibly transmission. It's not great at that, but it does something.
Mm.
So any advantage you get in preventing infection and transmission, we should snatch it, and that means vaccination.
You know, it's interesting that you've brought me quite naturally to the next topic, which was this week Health Canada authorized a booster shot of Pfizer for 16 to 17-year-olds. Now, I know that they had approved boosters for people 18 and older, but now this is 16 and 17-year-olds. There's been this tendency for people not to boost their teens. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that comes from the data around the risks of vaccination, in particular myocarditis, which was found to be of a higher rate than background for young people on their first and second doses, usually young men. But the way we decide whether or not to make a vaccine available to a certain demographic is to balance out the risks and the benefits. The risk here is myocarditis and other kinds of adverse reactions, which are very, very rare. In fact, the CDC computed that they would occur about 2 cases for every 100,000 doses, and the overwhelming majority of those will resolve on their own with minimal medical intervention, so there isn't a mortal risk for the overwhelming majority of those few cases. Whereas the benefit is preventing infection and possibly long-term long COVID implications. So one of the things we're concerned about with young people in COVID is this thing called MIS-C, which is this multi-organ inflammation syndrome, and that appears to be happening about 30 cases per 100,000, so twice as often, if not more. I can't do the math in my head, significantly more often than the adverse reactions to vaccines. So as a result, the advantages to vaccination outweigh the disadvantages to vaccination, including in the booster shots.
This is about weighing your risks again, which we've gotten very used to doing throughout this pandemic. Ottawa is moving towards ending distribution of the COVID-19 rapid tests. Found this out this morning. They'll be holding on to them, not sending them out to provinces by the end of this year. Now, we know that if you test positive for COVID-19, you're supposed to isolate for 5 days, test. If the public doesn't have a way of being able to test, how can they, A, confirm they have COVID? Because there's, I understand, flu season is coming late this year. It's in full bloom right now, along with cold season. How are people expected to stay home?
It's a good question. I think the subtext here is people aren't expected to stay home, which is unfortunate. I think there is this narrative ripping through all of this that suggests that the pandemic is over when it is not over. Um, It's unfortunate that the distribution of rapid tests will be discontinued. What I'm hoping is that there's a transition from government allotment of these tests to being able to buy it on the open market for most of us. And as we enter the normalization phase of COVID, after it becomes endemic and is with us for many years, which is a horrifying thing to think about, but that's the truth we're looking at, maybe we'll be going to the drugstore to buy our COVID tests once a month or so. So if it transitions to being able to be accessible via a variety of private sector suppliers, that's possibly acceptable, so long as there's a supplementation offer on the table for low-income people. I think that's where we're going to go.
I was thinking, do we have to have some sort of, and can we even do this, but legislation in set in place so that they can't gouge?
Oh yeah,
because you want to make sure that everybody has access to these tests.
Equity, it weaves its way through all of this discussion. The pandemic has a way of exacerbating divides between people, in particular between rich and poor. So we have to make sure that we have supports for people who can't afford this stuff.
I want to thank you for your time, Raywat Deonandan.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great day. Oh.